Hello Year 8s and welcome to our new unit of work, Data and Statistics. This one will be run slightly different to the units of work that we've done previously. The main difference is there will not be a test for this topic, rather there'll be an ongoing assessment, a gap, which we'll be working on throughout the whole unit of work. So the majority of the lessons we'll be learning concept or some content, and then we'll be directly applying that understanding to the gap. Okay, so before we get into the calculations and that sort of thing, it's really important to actually understand what data is, how it's collected, and what it's useful for. Make sure you're writing down these notes as we go through. Alright, so information is collected in the form of data constantly. Different organisations collect different types of data. So for example, as a school, we collect data on your progress reports, on your NAPLAN, on your PAT testing, on your report judgments to better understand our students as learners. During the COVID-19 pandemic, our society has become particularly reliant on data. Every single day we wait for the case numbers, we wait for the 14-day average, that really guides us into our lockdown restrictions and that sort of thing. So data has become particularly appreciated during this pandemic. Underneath these notes, write down one organisation that uses data and what that data is used for. Alright, so how is data actually collected? Now there are many different ways to both collect data, then record it, and then analyse it. These are just some of the main ways in which data is collected. First one is simply observations. Observing something happening and recording the results. You could be standing out in the car park of school and observing the different coloured cars and recording the results. We can survey people, so a process of collecting data by asking a group of people different questions and they submit their responses. A census is when every member of a target population is surveyed, so every few years in Australia we do the census where the entire population is surveyed. Measurement, where we measure something and record the results, so it could be your weight or your height, where we actually conduct a measurement and record the results. And then finally, an experiment, conducting an experiment and recording the results. So in science, you do experiments and record the results. That's experiment data being collected there. Different types of data. So here we have primary data and we have secondary data. It's really important to understand the difference between them both. This overlaps a little bit with your humanities subjects. In that, we look at primary sources and secondary sources. Similar concept. Primary data is data that's collected directly by a researcher from first-hand sources using methods such as surveys and interviews. It's often reliable and authentic. So primary data is data directly collected by the researcher or by you. An example of that is if you're going door to door and surveying people on something. Secondary data is data that's been collected by somebody else and then made available to other researchers. So an example of this is if you go to the Australian Bureau of Statistics website or the ABS, you can get census reports on there. Secondary data to you because it's been collected by another organisation or by somebody else. Finally, it's important to understand the difference between samples and the census. Census is an official surveying or recording of the entire population. So we want every single person within a population to be surveyed. Sometimes that's not practical. Sometimes it's not really realistic to be able to record or survey every single person within an entire population. When this is the case, what we do is we get a sample of that population. So we just take some of the people and survey them. Now there's a few different conditions around sampling. You want a good mixture of people, young and old, male and female, depending on what the population is, just to get an accurate reflection of their responses. Down the bottom in that last sentence, you'll see it says a sample size should typically be at least square root of population. What that means is, depending on the size of your population, the sample size should be at least the square root of that number. So for example, if you had a population of 100 people, that was the census, to take a sample of that, you would need to take the square root of 100, which is 10. So you'd need to at least, minimum, have 10 people in that sample. Australia has a population of roughly 25 million. So you would need to take the square root of 25 million to get an accurate sample of that population. That's pretty much the content for the first part of for this unit of work. What you can now do is start the GAT. This content covers questions from 1 to 4. Make sure you follow the teacher's instructions on starting the GAT and submitting it and that sort of thing. But you guys can now break off and start questions 1 to 4.